Welcome to MyFace myStory, voices from the craniofacial community, with your host, Dina Zuckerberg.
Hello and welcome. You are tuned into MyFace myStory, voices from the craniofacial community. We are a group of peers that see each other, hold space for one another, and support each other as we navigate life while living with facial differences, like cleft lip and palate, Apert syndrome, and Treacher-Collins syndrome. And don't forget to click subscribe so that you'll never miss a future episode. I am Dina Zuckerberg, Director of Family Programs at MyFace. I was born with a cleft lip, a hearing loss, and no vision in my left eye, but it has never stopped me from doing anything I've ever wanted to do in my life. I had 6 surgeries, years of orthodontics, and speech therapy growing up. I was teased in school. Kids would sometimes say mean things, and I would sit alone sometimes on the school bus and in the lunchroom. I always say there is power in the shared story in knowing you are not alone. So anyone out there like me, I see you. We all do. It's about people like us being seen and heard, about sharing stories from the craniofacial community. This is a safe space, a space where the voices of the craniofacial community are heard. Thank you so much for joining us as we examine facial discrimination throughout history. But first, I would like to have each of our special guests introduce themselves. Dean Kondolakis, please start us off.
Hi, Dina. Yes,
Hi.
my name is Dean Kondolakis. I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. Had 12 surgeries. I grew up in New York, but studied and traveled and worked in Europe and Asia. I currently work as an X-ray technician for an aerospace company in New Hampshire. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Next, we have Adele Capitella.
Hi, Dina.
Hi.
Thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to help share my story and reach out to the community and beyond. I have a rare syndrome known as Parry-Romberg syndrome. It's a progressive hemifacial atrophy. There's no known cause, and there's actually no cure for it. However, I was a New York City school teacher for many, many years, and I also worked with children in the foster care system. So I was out there in the field working with many people and many children. I'm also a cancer survivor, so I'm a year and a half down, and I'm doing well. Okay. I enjoy poetry and I love to travel. I also am an advocate for the community of people with facial differences, especially adults. So you can find us on Facebook. The group is called Facial Differences Adult Networking Community. So I hope you look for us on Facebook. And thank you again, Dina.
Thank you, Adele. And now Jasmine Stewart, our final panelist. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Stewart. I was born with a cleft lip and palate. I've had surgeries as early as 6 weeks old to my last one, which was 6 weeks ago. I am a writer, an advocate, a UX designer, and I'm also here because I represent this community, and I want everyone to know that although you were born with a facial difference, that is not your sentence.
Thank you all. So in the midst of this pandemic, there's been so much debate about wearing face masks and face coverings. For those of us with a facial difference, wearing face masks brings with it many feelings, both good and bad. If you have a cleft lip like myself, you might find it a relief that people are focusing on your eyes rather than on your nose or lips. while others whose upper face is affected, such as the eyes, might find it very anxiety-producing. But we all have one thing in common. Our facial difference brings out the best and the worst in people, depending on their level of awareness, empathy, sensitivity, and thoughtfulness. Why? Because when you have a facial difference, you have over 3,000 years of bias stacked against you from the day you were born. Throughout history, facial appearance has been associated with either good or evil, intelligence or lack thereof, and a whole host of other comparisons. We are going to examine some of the myths that have plagued the craniofacial community. We are going to start off with Jean, who will give us an historical perspective. Jean, in your opinion, how have people with facial differences been treated throughout history?
Well, I've done a little bit of research, and I found that there's a common theme that throughout history, facial appearance has been associated with evil, as you said, evil, stupidity, incompetence, and many other negative characteristics and stereotypes. Why? Well, because the face is being on the surface of the body, in front and center, as you relate to people, has been used as a convenient scapegoat to demonize and label people as being inferior. For example, in ancient Greece, the concept of facial symmetry was used to determine beauty and character. And for those of us with facial differences who have asymmetries of the face, we've been fighting this bias and trying to fix it either through surgery or through therapy. So it's really been kind of a rough road. It's certainly something that I've tried to change in my appearance. Unfortunately, in our society, image is everything.
Absolutely. So what about how people are portrayed in fairy tales with regards to the idea of beauty, like in Cinderella, Snow White, or Sleeping Beauty?
The good thing you brought that up. Yes, in the 19th century, you have the Grimm's brothers fairy tales, which drew heavily on the concept of beauty and ugliness to demonstrate what good and evil looked like to children. So you're telling these fairy tales, and children learn firsthand that if you're ugly, you're supposed to be evil. If you're beautiful, you're supposed to be good. And those tales reinforce the idea that one needed to be beautiful in order to be a good person. Snow White asked the mirror, "Who is the fairest one of all?" And I bet a lot of young minds were probably pretty, I wouldn't say screwed up, but they were certainly affected by that question as we obsess on beauty.
Yeah. Did you ever look in the mirror and ask that question? Anybody on this panel, has anybody ever looked in the mirror and asked themselves that question? I know for myself, it's funny, when I look at myself in the mirror, I don't actually look at myself in the mirror. I kind of gloss over myself, I think. And I know many years ago, some of us in the group actually did what we called mirror logs, where we looked at ourselves in the mirror and wrote and did a monologue of what we saw when we looked in the mirror, which was so incredibly powerful. And I think as I've gotten older and I have started to look at myself in the mirror more, but I think for so long I didn't really see myself in the mirror. I didn't want to really look at myself in the mirror. So I don't know if anybody had anything experience like that.
Well, what we see and who we are, I think our personalities, our characteristics of being good people speak for itself. It's not just a physical appearance, but it's an inner appearance that we have to portray and reach people out in that sense, if that makes any sense to anyone. It's by our actions that we show who we really are. It's not based solely upon our appearance. And, looking in the mirror is difficult. It is difficult for me. I wonder, if there's a day I'm going to go to sleep and wake up looking symmetrical, but
Right.
I would say that I have done work, mirror logs, mirror work. And one of the things that I noticed that once I was able to look at myself, then I was also able to look at others in the eye. Um, and it began to be a conversation about respect and acceptance as opposed to fear. And I want to go back to Dean's having a conversation about um, good and evil and facial attributes that pointed that out. I'm clear the older I get that people do not like change. People do not like differences. People are afraid of changing their own life. And so when you have when I was younger, I did not understand this thing called jealousy. I didn't understand this thing called lack. So, and when I say lack, I mean, um, I am jealous. I'm upset because you have something that I don't have. I'm confused because you are different than I am. And so I think that it's that myth that attributes of ugliness look a particular type of way. It doesn't. But change and difference does. And if you don't understand it, if you don't respect it, then there you are.
So, Jean,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about the sort of late 19th century, early 20th century, and the idea of the freak shows?
Well, yeah, definitely. I think that throughout this period, I mean, facial differences were still viewed as something to be judged and critiqued and mocked. And later on in the 19th century and the early 20th century, the so-called freak shows were very popular forms of entertainment. And what they did, what they ended up dehumanizing and objectifying the people with these facial differences and other disabilities. And yeah, it was just it continued the trend of looking down on people with differences.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about the Elephant Man. And for those that don't know, Joseph Merrick, also known as the Elephant Man, was an interesting case of someone with a condition that caused abnormal tissue growth all over his body, and it particularly affected his face. And through the care of his doctor, Dr. Trevis, he became the object of an attention in salons of the day. So it reminds me of when you were saying the freak shows, very much like what was portrayed in The Elephant Man, which was a movie that had come out at one point.
Right.
So,
Right, and I think that there's a flip side. You know, he brought him in and he took care of him. The flip side of it was that he was the object of attention, and people. I'm assuming that either they were really genuinely interested, or they were just curious, or maybe they did, talk behind his back. So there is this aspect of, um, him, yeah, just being out there for the entertainment of others, even though it was in a salon, or, a party of the day.
So he had a lot of painful experiences living with a condition like that. And, at first he was getting unwarranted attention that was negative. But once this doctor took him under his wing, people became interested and wanted to know more about this gentleman and his will to live and be accepted into society, which was a big step for him. And I think the doctor provided him with a sense of comfort and a sense of belonging, which I think is key to which we all seek for ourselves. You know.
Yeah, I think that it's difficult because it does, the way he was introduced into society, it kind of reminds me of being how we were in the hospital with doctors and interns circling our bed and looking at every corner of our faces. And I think as a patient, one can feel at times like an object rather than a human being.
Exactly.
I know some of you have had that experience before.
Well, there's an element of humiliation in that kind of an examination. When especially as a young child, you don't have a voice yet. You don't know how to express the feeling of this is uncomfortable for me, that all these people are staring at me. Even though they're there to help you, it still has an element of humiliation. So,
Right.
As I am on my healing journey and my growth journey, one of the things that is still very much scary for me today is being exposed, like being completely vulnerable, being exposed for whatever that thing is. And part of what we part of what comes with that type of what do they call it now? They call it that type of examination is the fact that you have to be completely vulnerable. Like the Elephant Man, his whole life changed, but he had to be completely open about who he was. And that's the thing about the English language. It's like words have so many definitions. It's which one do you choose to embrace and walk in?
So,
yeah,
Dean, do you think that Western civilization's perception of facial differences throughout history is responsible for the hostility that we experience today?
Absolutely. I think that with these 3,000 years of programming that people have, it's drilled into their subconscious minds from a very early age that a facial difference is not necessarily a good thing. I know that I've been in a situation where people treated me poorly because of the way I looked. And I know that there are a lot of people that didn't even know that they were doing it. It's programmed into them. It's like they're on autopilot. And this is it's sometimes more difficult to deal with implicit bias than explicit bias. Because explicit bias, you can confront it. With implicit bias, there's a lot of microaggression. I mean, I know Adele, you'll probably speak to that later on, but you have all these other things that you don't necessarily know are happening at the moment. Then you realize afterwards, oh my gosh, this is because of the way I look that they did this. And it is because of these 3,000 years of constant oppression of people with facial differences.
yeah.
The cycle of oppression is a constant battle that I think that we will continue to face, and we will continue to be faced with. But the good thing is that we are gaining tools, and we're gaining confidence to be able to resist and revolt, like periods throughout history. So.
And I think what's important now is that we're having this conversation. Without this conversation, we can't move forward from our past. We're dragging 3,000 years of bias behind us, and it's time to confront the issues. It's time to heal the community. It's a time for a lot of change. So we have to move forward. And I think all of us are on the correct path to doing that. Once we step foot outside our front door, we lose our privacy immediately. We've lost, it's not like you have a bad leg and you can put a pair of pants over it and hide it. We can't walk out the door, although these past few months we were able to cover up with a mask, and it put us all on the same level, kind of gave us a sense of security, oddly enough. But I see that there is some change ahead of us, and there's a lot of work that we still need to do.
Absolutely. And I think Hollywood hasn't really helped us, has it? Especially with the way people with facial differences are portrayed. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I mean, absolutely. You brought up a very good point. I mean, Hollywood, I'm going to tell you right now, Hollywood has not done me any favors. Okay. Because since the early 20th century, the ugly is evil theme has been propagated in horror and fantasy shows. I mean, you have examples of monsters and villains with facial differences that include Frankenstein, Voldemort, in Harry Potter, Freddy Krueger horror show, movie, The Orcs and The Hobbit, The Joker, and Batman, and many other instances where they thought that just having somebody with a facial difference is an easy way of just identifying somebody as evil. And I've been kind of appalled sometimes at the sloppy attempt at making somebody look evil just by putting a scar on their face.
Another thing though, that for years I was someone who was like, I was never shy, but I definitely would be withdrawn. I would definitely hide in plain sight. Like, that was a great superpower, I would say, was becoming the invisible woman.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to that is that we don't have to hide. Like, those are stories of people who decided that they were no longer, or they weren't going to hide. They were going to embrace who they were and go out into this world and live the best life that they could. And I think that's something that's perpetuated throughout all of those stories, is that you can go out and live your life. But what we have decided to do was protect ourselves and go within. We hide, we choose to do whatever but to shrink ourselves and diminish ourselves. And that's not the answer. The answer is not to hide. The answer is to be exposed and to shine a light on it, shine a light on us, shine a light on the community, and not to hide. And if you hide, if you are bold, that you will be looked at as what can be a freak, but depending on who you talk to, that may be a good thing. So I just think that by exposing ourselves, we do not have to, we don't have to hide.
Right. Well, I just want to say one more thing. I know we're going to move on to a different topic, but I think the topic of history is so important because it allows us to examine the cause and effect. Okay, you're looking, well, why are people this way towards us? How is this somebody who doesn't even know me treating me this way? Well, now you know there is this bias that's been accumulated over thousands of years. So for me, it gave me a great sense of relief to know that there's a logical explanation for this. It just didn't come out of nowhere. You're aware of it. And then once you're aware of it, you feel, I felt much better. I felt a sense of relief, but also a sense of unity within the community, that we can move forward and address this in a more comprehensive way, this kind of discrimination.
Thank you. And thank you, Dean, for that historical perspective. And thank you all for your really insightful thoughts. I'd like to now move to more sort of how today and how things seem to be in some ways the same, but how they are also different. And I'd like to actually ask Adele to sort of share with us, how do you think those in the facially different community deal with trauma in their lives? I think trauma is a piece of a lot of what many of us have experienced.
Absolutely. So, I call it a trauma cycle. I'm an older adult, so I've been through the ringer for years, but it's actually getting a little bit easier for me now as opposed to when I was a child. Each of us experienced medical trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma, psychological trauma. But we learn to cope and we learn to work through a lot of these cycles. What I think is important, though, we need to address mental health issues of this community, because I think we kind of push that aside and just focus on physically repairing ourselves and fixing what's wrong. So let's say, for instance, you all experience medical trauma. We go through some physical changes and pain going through surgeries, and the emotional stress of having to deal with that. People just see the physical part of us, but they don't understand the deep internal turmoil that we suffer. With that being
Absolutely.
said, I think that the advent of support groups and people communicating with each other, we're becoming stronger. We're having a voice, and I think the community is learning how to heal ourselves, and and that healing is ongoing. It's not just one time, it's continual. It's a big healing process. And I find meeting everyone, growing up, I didn't have this kind of camaraderie or support. So I was bottled up for years. It wasn't until I was almost 55, even though I'm 29, but that I was just breaking out of my shell, starting to speak about some of the experiences I had. So I honor all of you, and I appreciate the fact that this is a wonderful conversation and we're learning from each other.
Yes, and I just wanted to just break in for a second, and mention a very special person, Jody Berlin Morrow, who've worked for so long to give empowerment and expression to those with facial differences. I really regard her as a pioneer in the field of creative arts therapy for people with facial differences. And you're talking about empowerment, and I think Jody's done a fantastic job. She's been a godsend, and we're all very grateful for her work over the past 30 years, at least. I know Dina can speak to that, and
Absolutely.
hopefully we'll have a podcast interviewing her work, because she has been amazing, and there's no amount of gratitude I can give her that, just she's just amazing, and I'm so grateful for her and for her support over the years.
So
So
beautifully said, and so I agree with you 100%. I think to have someone who believes in you, who empowers you, who lets you know that you are beautiful inside and out, and encourages you to through whatever expression, whether with theater or workshops. And so, yes, I agree with you. And like I said at the beginning, I think there's so much, going back to what Adele was saying too, I think there's so much power in the shared story and knowing you're not alone. And when you find that community and discover that others, I know for me, when I've discovered that there's others that have had similar experiences, when I've always thought that I was alone in my thinking, and oh my gosh, no one could understand. And then I find these people that actually get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really powerful and amazing.
yeah,
And that's some of the milestones that we've made. You know, there's more education, exposure. There's books. There are some movies out there now that do explore persons with facial differences. The support groups, the media, the Facebook communities, and all the resources we have available to us now. So that's a positive light for us. And I also have to congratulate all of us in the community because we are a source of resilience. Um, we have moments of strength. We have moments when we're frail, but each of us persevere. And I need to congratulate each of us because we're just an amazing bunch of people.
Yes, we are.
And
Yes.
and I just want to add that to not reciprocate the cycle, but to say that this type of like this self-hatred ends. We're
Yeah.
gonna break that cycle.
Yeah.
This like doubting and critiquing ourselves ends. We're better than that. We're bigger than that. And
Yeah.
to just be able to go through in the world with our head held high, knowing that we had trauma, but choosing to heal that trauma, choosing to forgive people for whatever their intentions were, so that we can live, so that we can focus on what matters, is super, super important.
The poet Atticus always says, "You are enough."
Yes,
So,
but to that point, I would like to add that a very important point is to view oneself as a part of a separate group of a separate tribe, if you will. Separate but equal. I know I've mentioned this before, but and that thinking has enabled me to feel like I don't need to compare myself to somebody else. My whole psychosocial physical history has been different from the very beginning. Why should I be comparing myself to somebody else who hasn't been through that experience? I mean, Adele mentions the micro traumas and all of that we experienced on such a long
but
for over such a long
that's
time.
human nature. I think human nature. Uh, we are going to compare ourselves to each other, but we know now that when we're doing that, we have to stop and say, "Okay, uh, when I'm feeling down and I need to regroup, then I'm going to start self-care because it's always going to happen. That's just as a human, that's what we do." So,
Right.
Yeah, mental health and our, as some people like to say, protecting your peace
mhm.
is so important. It's so important, and I think that for years, I can only speak for myself, but for years I didn't know how to love myself. So I
Mm,
chose to love other people way more than
yep.
I love myself. And
Yeah,
so now that we are taking those steps to love ourselves, doing our mirror work, it makes a difference looking into your eyes of yourself every single day.
of
It makes a
course.
difference to have like shifting the dynamics of what you have known to be true.
And because all of that affects our relationships with other people, our personal relationship with our peers, our schoolmates, our friends, everything is interconnected. So you made a very good point, Jasmine. I appreciate that. And I think as a whole, we have a responsibility to build up a safe community and to seek out others who are struggling. I think it's a responsibility that we need to take very seriously.
Right, but we need to identify concrete steps to do that. And
Ex-
that's really key. And I think that you know going back to my point of separating yourself and saying I am unique, I am separate but equal because we are. I mean, I do feel separate from others because of my facial difference, but it doesn't mean that I'm less. So I think it's adopting a really comprehensive philosophy of living and of viewing yourself in relation to other people because you're going to have every day um, people who are trying to put you down or um, try and reinforce the fact that you're different, discriminate against you, and so on and so forth.
If I may add, one thing, I agree with you, Dean, in terms of the separation part. But where we differ is that separating yourself from things and people who do not um, empower you to live your best self, not necessarily knowing that you're separate or you are unique, because yes, we are definitely unique and we are definitely embracing our difference, but also everybody's not your friend. You don't like everybody and everybody's not going to like you, and just being able to be okay with that.
Right.
It's so true, Jasmine. Very true.
So I'd like to this has been an amazing conversation, and so many important things have been said, but I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience, anybody who's watching on MyFace's YouTube and Facebook channels. We're live, and we would be happy to take some questions or comments or any thoughts anybody has. So, and I think we do have from Stephanie, how do you prepare for surgery?
Jasmine, we'll go with you because I know that you just came out of surgery.
Oh man. Okay. Well, this particular time was different because I share with everybody. Like, this is what I'm up to. And because I was inside of a community, my experience with surgery was completely different. I had a medical team who definitely loved what they were doing. And so I felt comfortable, I felt appreciated, and the work that they did was definitely loving. So I didn't feel resentful. I mean, the first day I did, because I was
But
like, what did I
how do you
just sign
prepare
up for?
mentally for surgery?
Well, that's another thing. So because I told everybody and I was definitely open about it, I was able to be in community. So preparing for surgery outside of just, I was on YouTube all day trying to make sure that I had the right things, but really understanding why I was doing this, because I was doing it for me and preparing what that meant for me. And it also meant putting my support system in order and who those people were.
Yeah, that's important. Also, the aftercare after surgery. You know, you're making a physical change to your appearance, and people don't realize how traumatic that is. You know, how do you deal with that? It's so complicated and complex, but that's something also that needs to be taken into account. Whereas you need that mental, spiritual support and aftercare. It's so important. I know I was traumatized after my first surgery. I didn't recognize who I was, and it was frightening.
I still don't. I still look at I still look at myself and I don't recognize who I see. But what I can say is, this was the first time I had friends with craniofacial conditions.
Right.
So the same time that I was in surgery, there was another friend of mine, and we were able to like bond, and he'll check it in on each other, gauge our process, and so that was also very helpful.
Of course, that is. It's very helpful. That's very important to have someone that you could talk to who's going to understand that experience you just had. You know, I find that in this community, relating and identifying with people who share these experiences is extremely empowering. You know,
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
we have another question from Sandy, who's asking, what would you say to help parents of young children who don't know how to talk about their disability because they hate it?
Well, can I please? I would say this is what I tell all of these parents who I'm having this conversation with. Find them a community. Like, find them people that they look like, so they can have the language to understand, the language to communicate it. Have the support that they need to accept it, because it's one thing when you're talking to your mom and you feel like you only have a face that your mother could love, and your mom feels like of all of the disabilities you could have, you came out lucky because you still have so many of your other faculties. So you're blessed. They feel like they're blessed if this is
Right.
what disabled children look like in their book. So I would say definitely find a community like MyFace. MyFace has done leaps and bounds for me and the people that and the young people that I have come in contact.
But I also feel that parents do a great job of supporting their children, but they can't do it all. There is, their love is critical, but the outside world is is another reality altogether.
Well, I also think that parents need to explore resources and especially maybe enroll a child in a group of play therapy, art therapy. It's very important that
Yeah.
they express themselves in whatever modality, whatever strengths they have. Even theater, they have to find different outlets where they can express themselves. If they can't verbalize, maybe they could put it on a piece of paper. Even writing, when a child becomes older, writing becomes very therapeutic. It's another way of telling your story as well. We've all tried that. So,
Yes. Good point, Adele. I think that you mentioned creative arts therapies, and there's sand play therapy. There is that's a modality that children can use to express themselves without doing so verbally.
right. And when children can't express themselves, all that pent up energy becomes anger. And then now you have an angry kid on your hands. So you have to find different outlets so where that internal anger doesn't take over their lives, because it's very easily to fall into that pit. We've all been angry about our plot in life, but we also have to say, it's a balancing act, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
I agree with you on the outlets, finding that outlet and finding that community. I think it's so true. We have actually a question from Daly, who's asking, what happens when the parents are in denial? What do you do then? What is your advice for them?
Yeah.
Great question.
Dina, have you been in that position of informing parents and trying to deal with?
Yeah, I think that it can be hard when the parents are not willing to necessarily accept the situation that they're in. I think it's important. I think, in some ways it's important for the parents to find that community too, to have that
Absolutely.
outlet, to have that support, because I think it's so hard when you feel like you are alone in the world with a child who has a facial difference, and finding that support is so important, because again, it's that knowing you're not alone, that there's power in that shared story. And so I do think that's really important.
But
And I think, yeah.
what's interesting is you say finding. So I think there's a certain responsibility of the medical community to help these parents find, direct them in an area or a place where they can get together with other parents. It's overwhelming for a parent to have to start finding, support group for them, a support group for their child, having them go to appointments for surgery, and it's an overwhelming process. It really certainly needs to be addressed, maybe on the a local level, where when the child first goes to its pediatrician, like, we need to also educate the medical community about the resources that are out there and are available.
When I first heard when I first heard the word denial, I went to denial as in that what my child is going through is the same thing that I went through. And by that is, it just shows like the dismissal, there's nothing wrong with my child type of thing.
Hmm.
And I would say you really should listen to your child. Like really,
Mhm.
really, really um, hear and see your child, especially if you have a child that's hurting, because they don't know. They're wrestling with their own denials or their own questions about why they were chosen to have for this walk. So I would really want you to take a moment to listen to your child, see your child, and see what reflection your child is giving you in that moment.
And I'll add to that. I think it's just as powerful to what your child does say, but also what they don't say. I think sometimes I know I was that child who didn't talk, who didn't say I was having a hard time, or that everything was fine. Everything was always fine. And so I think it's also hearing what your child isn't saying, but also what they are saying. So,
Good point.
yeah. We actually have another question from Vanessa. She said it would be great to learn more about the MyFace Foundation. What is your main focus in the facial difference community? What are you trying to achieve? That is a great question. I think we are trying to become the resource for the craniofacial community, to support the resource through webinars that we have. We have one coming up on helping your child, you know, going into school, and sort of the psychological, the social needs. And we, through the podcast that we're doing tonight and will continue to do each month, to written resources, to having the support groups that we do that are now virtual and that anybody can join from across the country, to the virtual summer series we're doing with these author read-alouds with children's book authors who have written books about kindness and inclusion, and and written materials that are there to help with any questions you may have. And we want to be that resource, and we and we have events that bring the families together now, and the kids and families together, but also that are now virtual. But we have an upcoming Races for Faces event where the community comes together to raise awareness and funds for MyFace. So there are so many opportunities, and I think I encourage people to learn more at myface.org.
And also, I think you're out there educating the general public about this community, which is also important, because that's a battle that we need to come across and get the word out that this is a strong and vocal community, and people have to understand a little bit more about our lives.
Right, we have rights too, right?
Yeah,
I think so.
absolutely. And that's through, I think Adele is referring to the Wonder Project, where we go into schools to educate students about differences, choosing kind, and being an upstander. And so we are, I've spoken at over 140 schools, reaching over 40,000 students. So it's really been an amazing experience, and we want to do more and more and more. So if you want us to come to your school, do reach out to us at info@myface.org. So we actually have a question from Sandy wanting to know, some parents are coaxed into seeking reconstructive surgeries before their child has had the chance to decide for themselves. What do you think? What do you think about that? It's a good question.
That's something maybe a parent needs to speak to a counselor before they make that decision, and get a panel's opinion of what should be done. I mean, if it's something where the child needs a surgery to function better, then, I could understand. But if it's just a reconstructive surgery to improve the appearance, then I probably say the parent should wait, and let the child get comfortable in his own skin. And, he can't put a Band-Aid on everything.
Right. I mean, it's a complicated question. I think that depends on the context, on the situation.
Yeah.
That the child and the parent are going through.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think it is what parents are trying to achieve is to improve the quality of life for their child.
Right.
So
absolutely.
And I think it is about the quality of life. I mean, what I think that also the general public needs to understand that this is not always, not plastic surgery. It's reconstructive surgery. It's about improving the quality of life for that child. It's not necessarily about changing their appearance always. It's more than that.
And
it's not an elective surgery. It's not an elective surgery.
No.
Right.
At some point, you get there, right? At some point, you are able to make choices that, no, I'm not moving forward with surgery. But most of us, like if you have a cleft lip, you can't eat, you can't chew, your mouth is wide open. Like it's not about, definitely not about appearance. Eventually you get to a point where you become highly functioning, and now it's about, are you able to live with making those choices? I had an opportunity to stop, and then to be honest with you, my situation was the exact opposite, because once I started as an adult making these choices for myself, I realized how afraid of surgeries my parents were, and that some of my views on surgery were influenced by them, or my choices were influenced by them. So I understand that parents are definitely driving some of these, but in most cases, you have to get to a point where it's even an elective conversation.
And also the general public, they don't realize that just because you're going in for reconstructive surgery, they think you're going to come out looking perfect, and you're not. You go in as an ugly duckling and you're coming out as a swan. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It's.
I think that there is that, that aspect of there's a gamble, and you could just come out disappointed.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's. Psychologically, you have to prepare for that.
Well, I went in, I think I did more damage having reconstructive surgery than if I had just left myself alone. I came out with nerve damage to my face. I have a calcified lump of fat in my face. So
right.
It's a, it's a lot to handle.
Yes.
It really is. And I went in as an adult, so.
Absolutely.
I think
Adele,
it's a different, I think it's a different journey for everybody, and I think we're all on this journey. This has been an amazing conversation, and I can't thank you guys enough. I'd love to ask Jasmine, before we close, to share her poem with us that she wrote, Fresh Eyes, and maybe you just want to introduce it to why you chose to write this poem.
Sure. I wrote a poem called Fresh Eyes, and it really just is a reflection of what it means to shed the thoughts and opinions of others and begin to embrace yourself. So with that being said, I'm going to go into Fresh Eyes. Who is this I see reflecting back at me? Love, love, love is what I see. She is me, 5'4" with brown eyes. I can't stop staring back at me. Oh snap, the camera has got me. Trapped are my scars, insecurities, and inferiorities. When I look through the eyes of others, I am confronted by the hate of she. Reflection, reflection, reflection. Whose version of me is reflecting? Is it ignorance or arrogance? Is it spell binding or spell casting? Is it imprisonment or self-distraction? Shh. Be quiet. I'm letting it all go. Fresh eyes are these eyes. Lies are revised. Excuses circumcised. My truths are realized. Inside me, the presence of the Most High abides. Recognize these eyes are where my truth resides. Fresh eyes, the mirror between your soul and the voices you control. Know your worth, Queen, is your truth to tell. Know your truth, King. You have what it takes to excel. Reflection, reflection, reflection. It's fresh eyes looking back at thee. Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you, Jasmine. And I think it's such a perfect way to end this evening. And so I really want to thank each of you for sharing so much of yourself today and every day. And I'm hopeful that these conversations can help others better understand our stories and your stories while also creating a kinder world for all people with craniofacial differences. And so again, thank you all for this incredible conversation tonight. For 70 years, MyFace has been dedicated to changing the faces and transforming the lives of children and adults with facial differences by providing access to holistic, comprehensive care, education, resources, and support that paves the way for better outcomes. To learn more, please visit myface.org. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to MyFace's YouTube channel to catch future live broadcasts of MyFace myStory. You can also listen to the audio recording on your favorite podcast app, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to receive email reminders of new episodes, sign up at myface.org/mystory. That's myface.org/mystory. Thank you.